Shalom, salam, and welcome. This is Tour Guide Confidential, your backstage tour of the travel industry. My name is Dr. EYAL DUJOVNY, and I'm your host, guide, and occasional raconteur on this tour. I'm coming to you from my home in Haifa, Israel, and today I have with me a very special guest whose name is Elinoar NITZANI. Elinoar and I met about 7 years ago when we both worked for a tour operator company called Guy Tours here in Haifa. And as you'll hear in this episode, at that time, she was basically our go-to guide for small groups that needed a guide who was also a driver. Elinoar has been guiding for some 10 years and comes to guiding with a fascinating background of having lived across the world, both in her youth and as an adult. Thanks to her interest in this subject matter and training in the field, she is without a doubt one of the foremost experts in the budding field of agricultural tourism, of which Israel excels. In addition to this, we talked about the role of tour guides as ambassadors for their countries and the advantages and challenges of guiding as a woman. Please note that this interview was conducted way back in December, which is about 8 months ago now. I had every intention of releasing it earlier, but I decided to release some other episodes before it, and then I was faced with some personal and health issues that, together with the ongoing coronavirus nightmare, completely sapped me of any willpower to put this out there. So, if you're here just for Elinoar, I suggest that you go ahead till the interview. Otherwise, I want to give you guys an update on what's been happening with me over the past 8 months, but mostly from the perspective of my health and what's going on with Corona. First of all, my health situation. So I recently, 6 weeks ago, had surgery on my spine. I had what's called a laminectomy, as well as a discectomy and a facetectomy. All of these are fancy words to explain that my spinal cord was too narrow. I was suffering from what's called spinal stenosis. This is something that goes back a long time with me. I've had an issue. It first manifested 11 years ago when I was living in Georgia and doing my PhD. And it manifested as sciatica pain in my right leg, as well as numbness, which made my leg just fall asleep. And at that time I did an MRI, and they found that my spinal cord was only 11 millimeters wide, when the minimum should be 13 millimeters. And so I dragged it on for years, and I was okay. Sometimes I'd have occasional pain. It really depended on exercise, or if I slept in a bed which wasn't comfortable, which can happen a lot as a tour guide. But I kept it in check. I did every kind of treatment that you can imagine over the years, including yoga and acupuncture and chiropractors and osteopathy and physical therapy and you name it, massage, anything that I could think of. About a year and 2 months ago, after the corona crisis began, I injured it. I dropped something and I lunged forward, and I could feel it immediately. Something wasn't right in my back. And since then, the situation just kept getting worse and worse. And as you can imagine, it was a very depressing situation for me, because as someone who's a guide and someone who spends much of his time outside, walking around, standing, I just couldn't do those things. And I felt like, I had this image of myself in a wheelchair and not moving forward in life, and kind of stuck because of this health crisis situation that I was dealing with. And though I tried everything over the past year, I ended up having no choice but to have surgery. So I went to a orthopedic surgeon, I went to a neurosurgeon, I spoke to others, and in the end I went with the orthopedic surgeon, who opened up and kind of cut off the backside of one of my vertebrae to release the pressure on the nerves that was causing all of this problem in the area of L4 and L5. And thank God, I can't tell you how happy I am that over the past few weeks I feel like I've gotten my life back. So I can walk. I've been walking every day, which is the best physical therapy that I could do. And I can once again look to the future and think about guiding and doing what I love to do, which is being outdoors and exploring and seeing places. So that's the good news. Now, in terms of tourism, what's going on with tourism? Well, there's really no sugarcoating to it. We're in a pretty bad shape right now here in Israel when it comes to tourism. For a moment, I could say that we were looking at like the beginning of the end, kind of this light at the very end of a long tunnel. You could see that things were getting better. Here in Israel, corona numbers were way down and the restrictions were removed up to the point where, we even had a parade here for Pride Month, the Pride Parade, where over 100,000 people participated in Tel Aviv without masks. And it doesn't appear that there was a huge uptick in cases following it. But what happened is the Delta variant, as they're calling it, the Indian version of this virus, made its way to Israel. And at the moment, 90% of cases in Israel are from the Delta variant. And the numbers have started to move up again, and not only move up, but also affect people who were previously inoculated, who have vaccine, both doses. And Israel, has been leading the world in terms of vaccines. But unfortunately, it looks like we're headed towards another wave of corona, and the government decided that even though it said it was going to open the borders on the 1st of July, it pushed that off to the 1st of August. When I say open borders, I mean to anyone who wants to come here independently as a tourist or even in groups. It was going to be from the 1st of July, people could start to arrive, but all of our hopes were dashed. In the meantime, the government announced in great fanfare at the end of May that tourism was back, but it was just basically for the cameras. There's no real tourism at the moment, at least not any incoming tourism. All of the tourism that exists at the moment is something like 20-25 groups, which the government has allowed in. It has to be in groups. They need their PCR test before they travel and once they arrive, which is pretty standard for everywhere in the world. The difference here being that everyone who arrives also needs to get the serological test, which means giving blood. And not everybody wants to do that. There's all kinds of implications to it. And just physically it's complicated because when you're in the air, because of the cabin pressure, it changes your physiology a little bit, and it makes it very hard when you land to immediately take your blood. So they're literally poking these people again and again to try to get some blood. And then once they have the blood, you need to get results. Well, the company that offered 4-hour results was kicked out by another company which only offers results in 2 days. And so these tourists arrive in Israel and they need to be in their rooms in the hotel for 2 days. They can't go into the hallway. They can't go down to eat with everyone else. They bring them the food. It's really not an enjoyable experience if you think about it. Not to mention all the stuff you have to do before and also while here to avoid getting people sick with corona, which is frankly bullshit because the diseases are entering by Israelis. You didn't need any tourists for this to happen. Everyone sits on the same plane together. It's just nonsense, but it makes it look as if the government is doing something. In my situation, my case, I had actually work lined up for this summer. I actually had 60 days lined up where I was going to be with a family for a bat mitzvah trip, and I had a couple birthright tours, and I had a passages tour. All of that has really been canceled. It's all disappeared. At this point, I have one birthright tour scheduled in August, and even that's not sure. Between all of these government restrictions and the war that we had in May, we had an 11-day war, which came at the worst possible time in terms of tourism because people saw that and they canceled their summer plans. It was just at the point where they had to make decisions. And so there's really not much going on in terms of tourism. And I can tell you that myself and others are looking at changing careers because it doesn't look like we're going to be able to support our families anytime soon, especially since the government, which is closing the skies, has also made the outrageous decision that they're not going to give us any more benefits, unemployment benefits, even though because of a government diktat, we're unable to work. And so on Tuesday, we're going to protest. I don't know how much it's going to help, but we're going to try and protest. And we're just, trying to figure out what we're going to do next because we just don't see a future at the moment, especially between the corona and the government restrictions, it's just not much of a horizon at the moment. All right, well, on that kind of sad note, I'm going to request that everyone who's made it this far, please subscribe to the podcast. Please share this with other people. Please, if you hear this and you know anyone who can help us tour guides, please help. Please share the fact that we're sitting here. We can't wait to see our guests. We want to get back to work. And at the moment, we just can't do it because of these government restrictions. And I want to add one last thing. I'm not a coronavirus denier. But the moment we've got a couple hundred cases every day of corona and nobody is dying. It's been weeks since anyone has died in Israel. And the number of people who are seriously ill is somewhere around 30. So it seems excessive to close everything in the moment just because of 30 people who are sick. I don't know how many people are sick with the flu, but I'm assuming that there's probably more people in hospitals who are sick with the flu. So we need to open up the skies. We need to get back to life, and we want to work. So with that in mind, I hope you enjoy this episode. Thank you for listening, and I'll say just a couple words at the other end on my outro. Shalom, salam, and welcome to Tour Guide Confidential. My name is Dr. EYAL DUJOVNY, and this is your backstage tour of the travel industry. Today I'm here with my friend Elinoar NITZANI here in Haifa. Elinoar and I have known each other, I think, at least 5 or 6 years, since when I was a tour operator, before I was a tour guide even. And I'm really, grateful that she's here today for this conversation that we're going to have. So welcome.
Thank you.
So Elinoar, as I always do with all my guests, I wanted to start with asking you a little bit about your background. Can you tell us a little bit about, where you grew up and what you did prior to guiding, and also how you got into guiding?
Okay. It's an honor, first of all, to meet you and to have you come to interview me. My background is quite diverse, as life is, and I feel very fortunate to have been traveling since a young age. My father was a hydrologist, which is water engineering, so that took us, when I was in kindergarten age, to Peru, to Lima. He worked for an Israeli company in some research of arid lands. And actually the first language I studied was Spanish, to read and write. Of course, we spoke Hebrew at home. And afterwards, he decided to continue with PhD studies. So we moved from there to Reno, Nevada, in the western coast of the States. And there I studied my first years of school in English, of course. He finished his studies, and then my mother pursued her master's degree there.
So they studied University of Nevada, Reno?
Yes.
Okay.
Do you know the place?
yeah, I've been there actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I was on a program called Tahoe Baikal Institute, and so we were on Lake Tahoe for several weeks, and that's actually where I met my wife during that program. Exactly. And it was affiliated with the University of Nevada in Reno, so I've been on the campus and everything. Okay, so I didn't realize that about you. See?
Yeah, it was quite long ago. It was around the end of the 60s, so it has changed quite a lot. Now everything that you hear associated with the name Reno is Las Vegas and gambling, but those days were a little different. And then I came back to Israel actually as a Ola Hadasha, quite, to school.
Ola Hadasha means a new immigrant.
Right. Yeah. And from 4th grade on, and then we had another sabbatical year of my father in Missoula, Montana. I was a sophomore in 10th grade, 16.
Wow.
And another opportunity to get to know another part of the States and a different community, because Missoula and Montana is in the glacier, not far from the Glacier Mountains, and there my father worked in an Indian reservation trying to help them change from old hunters-gatherers to agricultural users, and that was another project. And
Missoula is also a place where, today it's a very hip kind of university town, Back then, I wonder what it must have been like going to high school there. And
yes, very hippie type and very
it was
nature,
also back then. Okay.
Environmentalist attitude. It's a giant state, Montana, but a very small population and very nature-loving people.
And not many Jews, let alone Israelis,
of
I
course.
imagine. Yes.
So we were actually meeting with a few Jewish families in a Methodist church there.
Okay.
But it was a nice cooperation, and I think also it exposed me to all these interfaith possibilities that later on, and now in my old age, I pursue myself as a tour guide. And then I came back.
But what I see is this pattern again and again with tour guides. Almost all of them, without fail, are people who have either lived abroad or really had multicultural lives, what I call liminal kind of experiences. They're here, they're there, but they're not really here, they're not really there. So it really impacts, I think, our ability to work with tourists from different places. So I think this is something, a pattern which is repeats itself. After high school, did you come back here to Israel for your military service? What did you do after high school?
Yeah, sure. I lived actually in Montana only for 1 year, but I was in high school in Bat Yam, the city I mostly grew up in, which is not far from Tel Aviv, and I was active in the Scout movement. So as such, we got drafted together as a unit of the Nachal.
What is the Nachal exactly? If you could explain in a couple words to people.
It's a unit that originally is based on the early days of the State of Israel when soldiers, boys and girls together, that's part of the advantages of this unit, are drafted together. Usually most of them are graduates of youth movements that were Zionistic originally. And they are involved in kibbutz life. In the old days, kibbutzes that were on the border of Israel, they had a part in guarding and taking care of the security issues. Well,
also founding settlements. Sometimes they would use Nachal to be the first group that arrives at a place, which might be a bit inhospitable, and then the Nachal would help build up the place.
Right. Even our group, so many years later, we were part of a Heachzut, which is like a new settlement in the Galilee, which now is called Hoshaya, which is a nice...
it's a nice town, yeah.
But our group, we had to even work in the fields, taking out the stones, preparing them for sowing, plowing. And that was when I practiced my role as shepherdess. I worked with a herd of sheep.
With the sheep. Wow.
Yes. And that's the source of my becoming vegetarian.
You and Kadishman.
Yes, I love sheep.
The artist Kadishman painted. Now he's passed away. Was also a shepherd at one point, and then he painted all these sheep, which he's famous for today. So you were like Kadishman in that sense.
I don't have any artistic abilities, but my love for nature and sheep, I think, originates back then, and turning vegetarian also.
And this kind of youth movements that you talk about, these were probably, I don't know, I'm asking, these must have been, kind of left of center. Are we talking about Shomer Tzayir or something like that? What kind of youth
I was in the Scouts, and in those days it wasn't so important, the affiliation politically. I remember it was mainly a frame for children or youth later on to have social interaction and to have leadership. Many of those friends still to this day, now when we meet so many years later, really it shaped their future and their social ideas and role in life. Mainly because the city of Bat Yam, it's kind of margin to Tel Aviv, was always considered like a maybe low-class area, but it's really not the truth. And people there are wonderful and shaped a lot of their skills from these youth movement.
Well, I think these things are fantastic because one of the things that you notice in Israel, different to United States, where there's this kind of sense of everyone is independent in the U.S., right? Here, there was a sense of social solidarity, which was from an early age inculcated. I see it even with my kids, like go through the grades with the same kids, right? So they have a cohort so that they create this kind of bonds of social solidarity. Whereas when I was going to school in the U.S., every year we'd be in a different, homeroom with different kids. We didn't know who we were going to be with. Everyone was on their own. Here, from the youth groups and from the schools, I think that there was this kind of building of social solidarity.
And that's true. And we really are reliant on these, we call them chevre, on these groups of friends that we follow them from the age of youth, sometimes in the army, and in my case, yes, because we drafted together as a group of scout graduates. And then after the army, which part of it was served in a kibbutz and part was in a settlement in the Galilee, many people decide to stay in the kibbutz and to fortify the youth or the new members of the kibbutz by bringing new blood, so to speak, from the outside, which that's what happened in the kibbutz movement during the years, that many of the young children move, and they, on the other hand, want to get out of the kibbutz.
Just so that our listeners who may not be familiar, just in a couple words, if you can explain, what is kibbutz? What does that mean to you, from your experience?
Okay, kibbutz is like a collective, a cooperative unit that its economy is based on agriculture. In the early days of Israel, it was the main success economically of the agriculture was due to the hard work and labor and ideology of these kibbutz members. They mainly came from Eastern Europe and Russia, Poland, and had this ideology to give up all of their private belongings and to share, to be like a commune in the socialist, communist ideas.
Egalitarian also.
Right.
Yeah. Way ahead of its time in that sense.
And to share everything that they had, including sometimes the children, growing them together, very good and high level.
They had
education.
these children houses where children would be raised together, in a sense, being children being seen as kind of belonging to the collective rather than to their parents, right. to the kibbutz itself. They were kind of produce of the kibbutz in a sense.
Right, which had its good and negative sides as well. Of course, the kids became very independent and hardworking and had ideals too, but the connection with the parents is questionable. And these days now, so many years afterwards, there are lots of...
there were feelings of abandonment at times, and I think today there's no kibbutz in Israel that has these children houses anymore. It doesn't exist.
Right.
For many years now, for maybe 20 years or more.
That's true.
Yeah.
So from there, I decided to study agriculture, not to stay in the kibbutz, like many of my friends did.
So you went to study agriculture in Israel, or
right,
where?
In Rehovot, which is a branch of the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, right. And I enjoyed it greatly, and I met my husband there.
When you say agriculture, do you mean, is it called agriculture? Is it agronomy? What are we talking about exactly?
It's the Faculty of Agriculture of the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. Mm-hmm. So actually the first year is general science oriented year in Jerusalem. I don't know how it is today, but it was the case more than 30 years ago. And then there are specializations during the second year of the first degree. Mm-hmm. You can choose your area of interest. So I chose it's called plant protection. It's also a very wide subject of how to protect plants from pests, insects, or from diseases, or from different other problems of the soil or the nature of climate. And then in the second degree, I specialized in plant pathology, which is phytopathology. It's diseases of plants.
This is your master's degree, you mean?
Right.
Okay.
And I had a very interesting research about how maybe to produce a natural herbicide for weeds, which is a big problem with all the chemistry of herbicides that is now very well known, that's not very healthy for not only humanity but the whole environmental system. The idea of my research, not only mine, the department to which I belong, was to produce artificially a disease in the plants, by a fungus, by some spores of some fungus that attacks this plant naturally, but to raise in the laboratory this fungus and to spray it instead of herbicides on this special weed that he researched. And it was really just the basic stages. I'm quite sure that it hasn't developed a lot, but that was the time that like organic agriculture and bio agriculture was kind of in the beginning days, when it was still a side branch in agriculture, not the mainstream. And that's again why I met my husband in this course of organic agriculture that was not part of the courses of the university, but on the side. And now everybody knows, and it's become quite mainstream, and the awareness to that has become much more.
Okay, and after your studies, you also lived in a variety of places. Did you work in your field, or
Right.
how did you end up in all these different places?
The agronomy took us because of my husband's job, that he studied soil sciences and worked in fertilizer companies and Israeli companies that sent him abroad. So we lived again in the States, in Florida, and there was mainly a mother because I had 2 small children at the time. And then we moved back to Israel for a while, but in the south of Israel, so it's another environment. And
where exactly?
Near Kiryat Gat. We lived in a moshav, which is another agricultural community, not like a kibbutz where you share exactly everything, but each family originally had some plots of land, and they didn't divide it equally, but they had a social structure and a mutual bank account, so nobody can go bankrupt. Anyway, I worked in a company that was called Hazera for seed production, and worked for a special laboratory that researched the viruses that some plants can have and how you can make them immune. So.
And then after that, where did you go?
And then, my husband was sent again to Spain.
Okay.
So that was not planned originally, but we moved to Andalusia, where again, sister company of an Israeli one that he worked in sent us, and that was really a very special experience. My 3rd son was born there. We lived in Sevilla.
Okay.
And later on we moved to Madrid because of another change in his job plan.
Okay.
So it ended up that we spent 15 years in Europe. After we lived in Spain, we moved to Italy. And we lived both in Tuscany, near Florence, and later on near Venice, in the area of Padova, which is Veneto region. Really wonderful and fortunate chance that we had. Again, wasn't really planned, but it was all because of the work experience of my husband, and we went all along with him and came back 10 years ago.
Okay. Did you work in Europe when you were there?
Mainly volunteering, because after my kids grew a little bit, there was a lot of cooperation in the schools that they were studying in, which are mainly international schools, of the parents. It was kind of a wide known thing that expats gather together, and one of the members of the couple, usually it was the men then, was working for a big company, and the wives mainly had a lot of time, so they did a lot of activities at the schools. So I worked as a librarian. Sometimes I gave some science classes to the kids. I did some courses of science and cooking, just fun activities, but we all felt a big community of expats, and in some cases there were many Israelis there too, but in others very wide diversity of cultures and countries. And again, that helps, I think, to shape your future career, but also to the children. I recommend it a lot, to become open-minded and no biases against anyone.
No, I completely agree. And, as you know, I've also lived in different countries and also with my family. But when I think, for example, every year we would always do Hanukkah. Right now we're in Hanukkah period. We would always do a Hanukkah party. And, Hanukkah is a holiday where you're actually required halachically to publicize the miracle, right? And so I would always do this. And I have photos, from southern India, from Madurai, where we'd have, with all our Indian guests, lighting the candles and explaining the background and stuff. And I loved it. But on the other hand, it was sometimes lonely, being the only Jewish family in an area, being the only ones who are lighting candles or doing something for Sukkot or Passover, Seder. To be the only one was special, but it was also kind of, lonely in many ways. And we would try to incorporate our neighbors and work associates, but it still felt quite lonely. What was your experience like, in terms of living that way, so far from home in a different culture?
I agree totally that you have two sides to each coin, but it's a chance, on the one hand, to enhance and strengthen your identity as a culture, as a religion, as your background, because there is no other option. So it forces the parents mainly to put a stronger emphasis on teaching the children about the background and their belonging. I think for the kids it was wonderful, and I'm quite sure actually that they absorbed a lot of knowledge actually from it. Was a type of a homeschooling about our culture. It depends also where you live, because in some of these international schools that are, again, for me it was really like a prize to win, to have my kids enrolled in such a school.
Sure.
They're very costly and not everybody can afford it, but in some companies it's part of the situation that there is no other option for expat kids to study, and they don't have enough time to learn the language, so they go there and speak in English while they incorporate the local traditions. So in the international schools, it's part of the curriculum to be open to all the different cultures, and although the children are in a minority, they're very proud to present in it, to share it with all the other students in the class. So it gives them a lot of strength and passion to talk about their own religion while learning from each other. And there's no good or bad, or mine was first or yours. They find all the common things about these cultures. I think if you study this at a young age, like my kids were fortunate to, then you grow up as very open-minded adults. And I wish all of the adults in our region could have this in the school, because it changes your approach to life, to people.
Yeah, that's what, Mark Twain famously said, that travel is injurious to prejudice.
Right.
This kind of idea that, when you get out, you meet, then it's much harder to be prejudiced to other people.
Right. But on the other hand, as you said, the negative side is that you always feel different, a minority. And again, I think this is the role of the family, because your house, although you move so many times, is where the family is, and that's where you get your feedbacks and strengths. But children don't always like to be different. So in that sense, it sometimes has a price.
Yeah, I understand. So you came back 10 years ago, and what did you start doing when you came? Did you come straight to Haifa 10 years ago?
Right, because my husband found a job back in a company that he worked for before. And the first year, actually, I was a governess to my 13-year-old son, which he spoke Hebrew at home, but he never studied it at school. He was born in Spain. So I helped him with the studies, and I came also to his school twice a week to help other new immigrants. It was like a class to enhance their written and writing abilities, because to speak it's first thing and it's faster and easier. But he was in 8th grade, which is kind of a tough age, and his bar mitzvah year, he did it a little later, or 7th grade actually. And I thought that I'll do something in the education fields. I wasn't really sure what I'll do professionally, because I lost so many years abroad in the travels that my academic knowledge was really diminishing, and I felt that I couldn't catch up 15 years later with all the kids that are now like my kids' ages and are already PhDs. So I was looking for something in the educational field, and then I thought to incorporate the knowledge of languages and cultures and to bring Israelis abroad to where we lived in Italy and in Spain. I thought to be a guide or an accompanying guide of Israelis that go abroad, and I signed up for one of those courses. And then last minute, a friend of mine told me, "No, you're making a big mistake. It's so hard to work with Israelis. Why not work with the tourists that come to our grounds?" The opposite. And I didn't even think about it, but after a week I changed courses and I did the tour guide course, and I'm not sorry at all that here we are.
And so you studied here in Haifa?
In Haifa, yes.
Right, in the campus, the port campus?
Right, like you did, I think, a few years later.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it was a wonderful experience, and you think that you know your country well, more or less, and you traveled everywhere, but suddenly a whole new world opens, and it's a never-ending world. Now, 10 years later that we're here, there's still so much to discover and to share with everybody.
So, how do you think your background impacted your decision to become a guide?
So I didn't want to lose the languages, first of all, that I acquired. By living abroad, it's very easy to learn a language and the cultures and people.
And wait, you guide in which languages, so our listeners know?
I guide in Italian and in English, in Hebrew, and Spanish. I have to brush it up because it was the first country we lived in, but it's so similar to Italian that now when I talk each of those,
I know your
have
Spanish
influences.
is very good too.
Yeah, I hope one day to go back to the level that I had.
And Hebrew as well.
Yes, Hebrew,
yeah.
right.
Of course.
Right. And nowadays, without the tourists, I think we should start emphasizing our Hebrew tours, although it's going slowly. Yes, so the idea was how to combine between my love for nature and trips and environment, a little bit of my experience with agronomy. I think it's one of the fields that we really can involve in the guiding, which I do in some cases.
Yeah, and this is something that one of the reasons I wanted to talk with you. I think it's something very interesting. You're actually the second agriculture, soil science, person that I'm interviewing who's a guide today. A few episodes back, we had a woman named Rotem who also was doing her PhD in soil science and then ended up being a guide. And but in your case, you actually do a lot of guiding, or occasionally get chances to guide groups that have things to do with agriculture and soil science. So if you could give us a little bit background, why do people come to Israel who are interested in these topics, and what kind of groups are these?
Okay.
And just, if anything you can share about this experience of guiding agricultural tours in Israel.
Okay, I think this is a field that's now on the rise, especially with the advancements of technology. Israel is a tiny nation in terms of space.
Yeah, most people don't realize how tiny this country is, I think.
20,000 square kilometers, and more than half is arid and desert. But even so, the agriculture is so advanced, and especially now the technology and know-how of irrigation, and now with all the smart agriculture using drones and satellites, and taking aerial pictures and knowing exactly what problems each field or each crop has just by different colors and different parameters. It's really very, very amazing. And to use these dry areas and to produce so much and such a variety of crops is really astonishing. The number of crops that are here, because of the diversity of the land too, not only desert, but we have the north.
Yeah, I think that's also a really fascinating thing about Israel, because it's a tiny country, and yet in terms of the diversity of the landscape, you really have a wide diversity. We have everything, I think, from arid desert to subarctic, kind of ecosystem, the climates and stuff. And correct me if I'm mistaken, but I understand that in every region there's different research centers set up by the government for the different soil types and climatic conditions. Is that true? Is there a system like that here?
Yes, the research and development stations. I worked in one as part of my master's degree, but it's fascinating. Also, the center is near Tel Aviv. It's the Volcani Center, and most of the research on a big scale is there. But they have these branches all over, from the north in the Upper Galilee, which is an area of mainly fruit trees. From cherries, apples, pears, kiwi, etc. And now the lake of Achula, which was once a big pond, but more like a swamp that was dried up.
A wetland, I guess we would call it, something like that. You know?
Yeah, it was dried up in the 50s, 60s, and now it's one of the biggest production sites for cereals and wheat. And now all the time there are innovations there, from like quinoa, which is not basically Israeli crop. We have mushrooms that are grown, of course, indoors, but now there's a new success of growing truffles. That's also in the high areas of the Golan. And
I think Israel if I recall, Israel is the first country that was able to grow truffles
in the special combination of.
So not just in the wild, but growing it.
Right.
And they're even growing it in places like I heard around NITZANI. They're growing.
That's where it grows naturally, but it's a different species. But even it's very, very hard to produce in the lab, or even to imitate the nature to grow truffles, because you need really special conditions. And there's research ongoing for years, and now there is a success. But even in the far arid areas of the Negev desert, because of irrigation systems and using treated water, because the water is so scarce. Wonderful crops of vineyards and jojoba, I don't know how you say it in
jojoba,
jojoba, for oil, and it's endless, and all the time new species are bred, and traits that are needed, like for longer shelf life or different taste, is just every year new discoveries are made, and implied with there's a combination between the research stations of the Ministry of Agriculture to the farmers. There's a very good connection. Their first few years of trials and experiments, and once the few years pass and it's confirmed, then they start growing it on a very wide scale. And still, though the agriculture is just a small part of Israel's economy, it's a fascinating field, and I think there is a lot to learn there. So what you were saying about groups.
What do you mean by small part? I mean, how much is it today?
Less than 3%, I think. It's
really?
2.5%.
Wow. Because in the 1950s, Israel's biggest export was oranges,
of
right?
Course.
So we were a very agricultural economy in the 1950s, to the point now where you're saying it's like 2.5%, 3% only of the economy.
That's a pity, because also the land has been taken. A lot of the land for agriculture has changed the destination and turned to real estate, and
real estate is more profitable many times than agriculture, and so fields have been turned into neighborhoods, basically.
All around. But the knowledge, the know-how, and the genetics is a field that you still don't need so much land, and that is exported too. And
also, you didn't mention, but I know that in Israel there's all this kind of hydroponic, greenhouse kind of growth, so you can do it in any place.
Right, now it's also on the rise, all the different alternative energy resources, and yes, the hydroponic is really on the rise, because you can grow your own vegetables in small areas in different containers, or without the soil. Actually, it's detached from the ground, and
sometimes it's in the air. I mean, there are places where I've seen it where they're growing stuff. Just the roots are out and it's in the air, and they're being sprayed occasionally, by water and nutrients.
Right. So the possibilities are really endless and all the time on the rise.
Okay, so we have all this infrastructure in Israel. We have all these different research centers. We have different climatic zones. And Israel is, world renowned for its research in agriculture, most famously the drip irrigation, but many, many other things as well. And the result is that people come here to learn from Israel, learn from Israeli companies about it. And when they come here, that's where you come into the picture, right?
Sometimes, yes. I really like these tours because it's emotionally in my heart, and I'm proud to show off what Israel has to offer. So mainly my experience was associated with Agritech. We have this international fair every 2 to 3 years, which is a big collection of exhibition parts from all over the country of machinery, technology, crops, and it has an interest all over the world. Lately, many Indian companies have acquired the irrigation companies of Israel and different technology aspects of it. So many groups come from India, and I had a few groups associated with that. I mean, they come for a few days to the exhibition. Then we have a special tour to see hands-on fields or companies, greenhouses, etc., depending on the interest of every group. And usually some tourism, classical tourism, is incorporated on those tours too, which is also interesting for me to see the reaction, how the people are different in their
because their cultural context is different, right? So if you come with a Christian group, even if they're not practicing Christians, the stories that are connected with the New Testament, are fresh in their minds. Whereas an Indian who comes here, they grew up on different stories, right? The Hindu stories. So for them, it's not as resonant, maybe.
Of course. Yeah, and it also has such a vast option because sometimes I have guided, for example, people that are just into fruit trees or specifically, different varieties of pomegranate, for example. So they want to see all the greenhouses, the nurseries that are associated only with pomegranates. They don't want to see anything else. Sometimes people want to absorb new ideas and to kind of steal or to take from here things that apply to their countries, and it could be anything new. Even aquaculture, different fish or algae or biotechnology, because that's another thing, for example, in the faraway desert in the Negev.
I should definitely do a tour of aquaculture with you, because my PhD was actually on aquaculture in India.
Wow.
Yeah, so I would love to do this tour with you one time.
Yeah, now algae and not only fish.
Algae all the way in Eilat, right? That's where they're growing.
Also, but
there's
even
a
near,
Japanese guy.
in Nachal Alexander, near Michmoret, there's a new...
Okay. We didn't know that. See, we have a lot of interests.
Yes, we do. And once I had an Italian, for example, guest who was, I think, a main PhD or even a professor of livestock and cows, because he was in the Bologna area where they have, not far away from that, the Parmigiano production of cheese. And he came here on a special duty to find out how he can convince cow growers in Italy to have their cows eat different grass or weeds, not weeds, what do you call the herbs, that have been irrigated by treated water. Because in Israel, of course, many crops are being irrigated by treated water that is safe. But in Italy, because they're very, very strong on the taste of every fruit and vegetable, and they were very, very suspicious to let the cows that produce the milk for the Parmigiano have to eat the different types of herbs that were irrigated by that, and they didn't let them. So he came to talk to different scientists and cow growing people how it's possible and in what methods they use. And it was really an interesting tour, also with different production sites of water treatment.
Which is also another field which Israel is a leading, leading the world in this field, in the sense that I think you can maybe tell me the statistics. What is the percentage, more or less, of wastewater here which is reused
For
agriculture.
I think it's the first in the world. Maybe
We are the first in the world. Yeah, somewhere over 90% of our wastewater is reused for agriculture. And the second best in the world is, I think, Spain. It's somewhere in the 22%, somewhere around there. So we're far and away. Of course, we're much smaller than Spain, but still.
Here it's mainly used for tree crops or for irrigating
like dates,
grass.
I know they use for dates. Dates use a lot of water, and so use the
It's still not for like green leaf vegetables or crop vegetables. That's probably going to come also one day. But even for tree fruit production, it's.
But another thing also is when it comes to desalinization and use of water from the ocean, not only for drinking purposes but for other purposes as well. So another leading. Have you had a chance to guide any of that?
Yeah, the same person from Italy. He wanted to see also the desalination plants. We had a tour in near Palmachim, and he later on we visited the Negev research station in Ashalim, and he tasted a few products that were irrigated in the desalinated water, or brackish water. And in some cases, it even causes a improvement of the taste of some vegetables. They say that some type of tomatoes, again, bred by Israelis, are even better after they're irrigated.
Irrigated with desalinated seawater. Interesting. Well, this brings me to a question or thought. Yesterday, we're one day after an announcement that Israel and Bhutan have signed an agreement or normalization of diplomatic relations. Israel is one of only some 50 countries with which Bhutan has diplomatic relations with. In fact, Bhutan has no diplomatic relations with the United States or China, which is on its border. But Israel is now officially has relations with Bhutan. This didn't happen out of the blue, though. Actually, from my understanding and reading, for the last 7 years, delegations of Bhutanese farmers have been coming to Israel to learn specifically about agricultural techniques, modern agricultural techniques. There's an organization that I've worked with, I've guided for them before, usually right around now in Christmas, called Agro Studies. So they bring, people from all over Asia to learn about agriculture here. So first of all, clearly this is something which Israel is excelling in, and people all over the world are seeing this. But I think that it's more than that. I think that the agricultural tourism that you're doing and that we had from, they're not even tourists because they're coming in for studies, these Bhutanese. This is part of Israel's diplomacy. Right? Israel's public diplomacy, or maybe just, not even public, it's part of its diplomacy. What do you think about that? And what do you see your role as the person who is the go-between? You're actually, in a sense, helping Israel's diplomatic standing in the world. Have you thought about that and what that implies and what that means?
Unfortunately, I haven't guided anybody from Bhutan yet. That sounds quite exciting, and I think we do have a role that is really important in diplomacy, in every aspect, not only in agriculture, of course, but that's one of the means to bring it about. I see the reactions of people coming on these agricultural tours, and even simple discoveries, to say, about new species that were developed here from the wild flora that existed. Israel, again, as being a bridge between all these three continents, not only different peoples passed here and roads, but the number of species of plants that are endemic, that are grown only here, is quite astonishing.
Maybe we should explain that to our listeners just for a second here. Israel is located geographically at the center of the three old world continents, meaning Africa, Asia, and Europe. It's a land bridge between Africa and Eurasia. And as a result, the environment here is actually very diverse, as we mentioned already. And because of that, you can grow a variety of species that in other places, because you might think to yourself, what is in common between Bhutan and Israel? What can Israel teach Bhutan where their climate is completely different? And yet there are things that they're coming here to learn. Same time, I would point out, recently there was there's the first steps towards a peace treaty with Sudan. And one of the things that they kept saying, the Sudanese were saying, is we need this kind of assistance, right? So we have parts of the country which look like Sudan here as well, and we grow things there. So this agricultural, engagement and tourism is very important to Israel's diplomacy as well. And as the tour guide, you're kind of at the head of this. You're the person who people see. So how have you thought about that and what that means?
Yes, I think again that we should enhance it more in the tours that we normally do with many of the agencies that usually don't have time for that because it's the classical must-see areas. But if I have a chance to be independent or to make the itinerary myself, I almost always incorporate one day of agriculture exposure. And again, I was saying that many of the special things that we can boast about here is again taking some of the original wild species of plants that are part of a very special collection that grows only here. And we see again the combination of history and archaeology or anthropology, how people domesticated many of these species to become part of agriculture. A lot of the history of agriculture here is the domestication of plants and animals because the society became a farming society.
And maybe we should just, as an aside, point out that the immer wheat, the mother of all wheats, was discovered here.
Right, in the north of country, which is near Rosh Pina, which again is a site where you can see today in the wild some very special species of grains and cereals. And one of our agronomists that was famous for this discovery.
Aronson was his name, yeah.
Yes, he brought it about, and from that species in the wild were produced species that are much easier to cultivate and with a higher content of protein, for example. So
is this part of the green revolution you're talking about?
Yeah. Right, and then yes, so in the tours also to show the people not only the modern agriculture and technology, but also where it comes from, and some of the old biblical species that are mentioned. I think it's a nice combination of the whole philosophy of kind of the tourism to show not only the present and the advancement, but how it relates to our ancestors here or whoever was living here and used it as a beginning way of how to combine their local life and
So here's a contentious question. Traditionally, or in the research of the last 30 years, typically when people talk about where agriculture was invented, they'll talk about Turkey, someplace in like Çatalhöyük or someplace around there. But I've seen recently there was an article which claimed that in around the Sea of Galilee in Ohalo, there's evidence for agriculture from 24,000 years before present. What is your view of that?
So I actually don't know enough, but what I remember is that the excavations revealed that there was use of domesticated types of grain, I think smaller types of grain than the wheat, about 10,000 years earlier than what was thought to be. So instead of between 10 and 13,000 years ago, which was the beginning of domestication, it was, like you said, 23,000 years ago, and that's a big difference. And again, it's a theory not totally proved, but
it's kind of gone back and forth, right? Because at some point in the 1930s, I think, they discovered this Natufian culture.
Yes.
And that's considered, are they considered the first agricultural group? One of the first, for sure. and it was discovered here, but then they discovered things in Turkey which, pushed back the timeline. And now this is, again, challenging that timeline. I think, though, what's interesting about it is that Israel, long before it was Israel, was a place of innovations, right? And I suspect that it may have something to do with our geographical location, because people from different places were passing through here. And wherever you have a place where lots of people are passing through, then people compare. Oh, you do that like this here? Oh, we do it like that where I'm from. And then in that comparison, I think you can learn a lot. And I think you're continuing that by, guiding people here on these kind of agricultural tours, because they're coming from all over. And so it's a continuation of that kind of long-standing, condition or situation here.
That's true. I many times enjoy guiding, not only for my passion for touring the land and sharing the knowledge with the tourists, but also I learn so much from the tourists that come here, because again, that's the reaction. So for example, in Capernaum, where you see many mortars of wheat, because that's the area where this mother of wheat was found. But in the Roman times, it was a big center for flour production, and from basaltic stone sometimes, because that was the local geology. I had one tourist from Portugal that said that in his backyard they have a mortar that's very, very similar, the same size and the same shape of the mortar that was found in Capernaum 2,000 years ago. And I thought that's very strange, because we're talking about so long ago. And he said, yes, even my grandparents used to grind wheat in it, because it's like something very respectable in our family. And later on, thinking about it, I thought that the Romans were also in Portugal, and they had their mills and mortars also there. So probably in one of those villages when they found it, the modern dwellers continued to imitate the shapes and sizes of those
basins or mortar and pestles.
And found it probably to be convenient until these days.
We are, as tour guides, obviously, and I think this is true anywhere in the world, ambassadors for our countries, right? In a sense, right? We get out there, we talk to people, they see us as representatives of the place where we live, and we're also explaining and showing these places. But is that a role that we as tour guides should embrace or not? There are some people who say the role of the tour guide is to be as completely, unbiased, to be just factual, to just explain things, based on nothing personal. Don't include anything personal, and not to be an advocate for a place. What do you think about this kind of idea of guiding? Where do you sit on this spectrum between being, including more personal aspects versus, something which is a little bit more unbiased?
Yes, I believe that we definitely are ambassadors, and we should be, but it's a very personal question, because the things that I like to show is, of course, the things that I love about this country and that are positive. Again, it's a subjective subject, but we have so many things to boast about, and that's what I try to show. I usually don't go into politics. If I do, I try to show all the sides of it, not from one point of view. But I think we can be ambassadors even without necessarily entering into the politics, because through the live actions of people and the daily life, you can be very truthful to the facts of the developing country and how it has evolved to this point, encompassing again all the history and Zionism, or the reasons for us being here. Again, I think the code is to show neutral aspects of life here, but with all the positive outcome of it. So it's a special type of ambassadors, I think.
And in general, what kind of tours do you usually guide? I mean, if you could tell us, like, what is the typical makeup of your tourists? And we know, okay, you have these agricultural tours which are specialized, but I imagine most of the time you're doing other kind of guiding. So what is the typical kind of tourism that you specialize in or do in general?
Right. So, as being now of an older age, I can leave my house for a longer period of time. So usually I have weekly tours of...
Week-long tours, yeah.
Yes, from, 5 to 12 days. That's the longer tours. And I specialized in small groups. About 5 or 6 years ago, I pursued a driving license of a special Ministry of Tourism car. It's called Eshkol, when we worked together in the agency of Haifa.
Most of the tours that you were doing when I was a tour operator was through this kind of private vehicle. For our listeners,
like a minivan.
Yeah, for our listeners who aren't familiar, and I think most Israelis even wouldn't be familiar, is that in Israel, the tourism industry is highly regulated. And one of the things that is regulated is the type of vehicles that tourists can be taken and shown the country around in. So you can't just put a tourist in your own private vehicle. Right. There are certain vehicles which are imported by the government with special tax breaks for those vehicles. These are called Eshkol vehicles. And in order to drive one of these vehicles, you need a special license. Basically, it's similar to a taxi driver's license, only unlike other countries where to be a taxi driver involves a short, test, maybe a couple weeks of studying at the most. In Israel, to get a taxi driver's license took me almost 3 years. I don't know how long it took you, but it takes most people 2 years to get this license.
Right.
And so once you have it, you can drive in these Eshkol vehicles. So you said 5-6 years ago you started?
Yes. The first years of my tour guide experience were mainly big groups and a lot of cruise ships. Mm-hmm. And then I was questioning the fact that if I should do this much longer, because it wasn't a very positive experience. It was really a good boot camp. But the mass tourism and the big lines and the panic to lose some tourists here and there in the old city.
Which has happened to all of us.
Yes. A lot of pressure caused me to change idea. And then since I did this special Eshkol license, it really was a positive outcome for me. I like working with or small families or even like business visitors. Many of the Israeli companies that they want to give like a special day or prize to their guests, they send them for a few days or 1 day of a tour outside of all the meetings that they have. And then it's really nice to get to know the people personally. With the family tours, again, it could be like a bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah tour for a very close family. Sometimes it's more than one family. And again, some people, like a few groups of friends, a few couples. Also, it's a special dynamic in the car. These Eshkol license permits us to guide up to 16 people, I think. So it's usually, or a minivan, from 2 people to 8 or 9 in a car. Sometimes it's bigger. And so with the companies that we work usually as a driver and guide, that's quite a challenge because sometimes...
You mean not driver and guide, driver who is also guiding, right?
Yeah, that's our...
Because you can have both. You can have a vehicle where there's a separate driver and you're guiding,
right?
Or when you're driving and guiding, and that has its own challenges.
Very much so.
Yeah,
yes.
What, for example, share with us?
Yes, there was one time that it was quite a hectic itinerary to take a person or a family from Haifa to Jerusalem on a day that was a cruise ship that came.
Oh, okay.
Right?
So these are people who came off the cruise ship, but they decided they wanted a private vehicle,
Right.
and you were guiding them.
Yes, and driving them.
And driving them, of course.
And then in Jerusalem, and these days in general are very, very strictly planned because the tour has to end in time for the cruise ship to launch back to some other
So
countries.
the cruise ships, we should point out, we both, Elinoar and myself, we both live in Haifa. And Haifa is one of it is Israel's largest port. And so we do get cruise ships here. When they come here, the cruise ships, we do tours to Jerusalem and other places. But we have very strict deadlines. Because the cruise ship, for every hour that it's docked in port, they pay thousands of dollars for every hour to be docked. So if they leave late, it's a big issue because it's a financial loss to the cruise ship company. So as guides, we're enjoined always to bring our guests back, long before the deadline, so that they don't end up paying more money. So what happened in this case?
In this case, although I thought sufficient time to come back on time from Jerusalem to Haifa, there was a big traffic accident on the highway, the main highway from Jerusalem to the north. And the time that was expected to be back was a few hours after the ship should have gone back. And there was a big stress. And of course, I had to show the tourists in the car that everything is okay and life is as usual. But on the phone with the agent and his helper, there was a lot of tension. And I was feeling that I would have to bring them in the end to the airport to let them fly and catch the ship.
Yeah, which is what they do in cases where people miss the ship, because the ship ends up sailing, and so they have to fly them to the next ship's destination of the ship. So what happened in the
So
end?
luckily for us, and taught me a very good lesson for the future, of course, that many other tourists from the same ship were late because there were buses and other Eshkol vehicles stuck
Also
on the
in that
same traffic
accident,
jam.
yeah.
And luckily the ship delayed its departure in a few hours, so everything was okay. But yeah, that was one of the lessons that I learned by that. But again, it's a wonderful experience to guide. I like these small groups because you get to know them a lot better, and you can change the itinerary exactly according to their needs. Because sometimes in the big groups with the agencies, they have like a very general itinerary, and to some people it's good, to others not. But in these small tours, it's really tailor-made, and you can be very flexible. The name of the game in this type of tourism, I think, is to be very creative and flexible, and you can change the itineraries and to make it a lot better.
To give you an example from my own personal experience, this happened, I think, about a year ago. I was invited to do a private tour with some people from a ship. It was a couple who I was told want to go to the Sea of Galilee and see some of the sites around the Sea of Galilee. So I came prepared. I always have my little, I have this kind of folders with pictures, with explanations, with all this kind of stuff, audio-visual kind of materials, AV stuff. And I came and I arrived and I said, okay, so we're going to go here and go there. And they're like, wait a minute. We said we want to go to Jaffa. I was like, really? So I went to make sure that it was really the right people, and it was. And somehow the ship and the tour operator decided that they wanted to go to the Galilee, but what they really wanted was Jaffa. So I said, fine. So we just drove to Jaffa and we spent the day in Jaffa. Of course, I didn't come prepared for that, but I can guide Jaffa anytime. But I didn't have my little folder with the images. But this is the type of stuff that happens to us as tour guides. We have to be very flexible when we're working with people, because we really never know.
Right.
Not only the conditions can change, like the traffic jam, but our guests may be interested in something completely different than what we were told.
Yes, I had a total change in plan for a whole week. I had a traveler from India, lonely one person, Muslim from the south of India, who the company, the agency who I worked with, was sure that he was Christian. They didn't even ask, because in some cases they think it's too private to ask exactly about your background and your interest. In some places they really do a very thorough research. So in this case, they assumed that he was from south of India, so he would be a Christian pilgrim, because I also do a lot of pilgrim tours for Christian from different denominations. Anyway, it turned out that he was a Muslim, and he actually came here to research or to be exposed to the connections between Judaism and his type of Islam, which is not the Arab Islam of the locals. It was fascinating. Again, I learned so much from him, and I had to change the whole itinerary day by day. He wanted to pray every day in a mosque, which was not the course of the places. Luckily, the accommodations fit to places that I found every day some alternatives, and we visited really interesting places also for myself, but it was a total switch in plans, and it was in the end a win-win situation, because we learned so much from each other. And then from that tour, he brought his family the next year, and the tour was totally planned very well, but yeah, he helped me guide his family in that area as well.
That sounds like a really interesting trip, and also the fact that he came back with his family, I think, is wonderful. And that's one of the things that I really love about guiding, is that you make these connections. You know, I'm friends with so many people who I met through my tours.
Me too, yeah. It's a really endless array of connections and future relationships with families and people that really are from all over the world. So in that sense...
You've also had a lot of experience with Indians, which is something also that we have in common, because I lived in India and stuff. You're going to tell me something about this, a group of women from India that you guided at some point?
Right. One of the companies I work with brings groups of women, of ladies, like for empowerment tours, women empowerment, which is really interesting, because we all have like a basic, not a very big knowledge of India, but there are unfortunately many guides that are afraid or don't want to get near groups from India because they have some bad reputation. But I find it totally different. It's so colorful and enriching. And these women groups are one of the examples that I really enjoyed guiding, because most of them are, as a group, also very versatile. They have in common that they are business women or from some companies, and they are interested in coming here not only for pilgrim reasons, like many of the Indian groups do, but to see like modern life in the Middle East. And the last group I had, the tour leader was really into fashion, and the group was mixed. Also, there were Muslim women, Buddhist, Hindu, a big array of cultures, of denominations too. It was not a Eshkol group, but it was, I think, 15 ladies, which is a nice size for groups, which I like.
So you had a driver, you didn't have
Right, in a mini bus, which is not a big bus. So those are quite ideal groups. And first of all, I learned from them also the openness, because it doesn't matter if they are Hindu or Christian or Muslim. All of them wanted to share the experience of their colleagues on the trip, for one hand. And the tour guide, the tour leader, which is usually the head of the group who brings them, she was really into fashion. So in Jerusalem, for example, she saw many Orthodox ladies with this hat that's called a bobo.
Okay.
Some of the modern new women that are from Orthodox families, that are religious, Jewish families, wear this hat that it's very special and ornate, but it covers their hair because they're not supposed to exhibit their hair.
Is it the ones that go up?
Yes.
Yes. It kind of looks like Marge Simpson from the Simpsons.
Right. Or to them it looked like Nefertiti. I don't know, some
Nefertiti also, had some
Egyptian.
Right.
They didn't know anything about where it comes from. They thought it's a fad here of women. They couldn't, at the beginning of their tour, tell if this was a Jewish lady or an Arab Muslim lady, nothing, but they liked the look of it. So the tour leader was really nagging me all the time to buy the whole group these bobos.
Okay.
I didn't know even that it was called a bobo. I feel very embarrassed, but I learned from there because it has some other names. And we had to change some of the itineraries of the trip for shopping sprees to find the best prices for this bobo in the modern city of Jerusalem. And so we did, and she kind of forced everybody to go around with this, but together with that came a dress, some kind of attire from the old city market, from the bazaars, of kind of a belly dancing dress with paillettes that she loved, and also she convinced the whole group to buy. So here we are, a group of ladies that are from different origins in India, coming with these bobos on the streets of Jerusalem, and people stopped to take pictures of them and asked them, "Oh, so this is from India, can you send me or tell me where to buy?" Because lots of Israelis go to India, so they were asking these Indian ladies where they can find the attire, not even suspecting that it's from Jerusalem.
Itself.
That was nice. Yeah, that was their special experience with the fashion statement that they wanted to.
Well, this brings me to a question that I actually wanted to raise with you, and it's part of, I'm interviewing several women right now, so I'm trying to understand, guiding from the perspective of women guides. So you're telling us about an experience with this group of women from India. What is it like for you, first of all, do you feel a difference between, when you're guiding a group of women versus, let's say, guiding a group of guys who, are here on their kind of agricultural business tours? That's the first question. The second question is, what is your experience as a woman guide? I think you have an interesting background in the sense that I don't know what it was like 30 years ago when you studied agriculture. Were there many women in your cohort? There were already then. Okay, so it wasn't considered like a male field.
In the soil sciences, for example, where my husband studied, there were very few women because it's a lot of physics in those days.
Right. Today it's probably more even.
Yes. And but I feel in the tour guide world there are lots of women.
There are many women tour guides, no doubt about it.
Right, but not so many maybe doing the outdoors, the tiulei shetach, what we call, which is in nature, backpacking. There are, of course, but of course when you're younger you have to commit to growing, to being home and to have your children growing. You can only do it in a later age, and then sometimes physically it's hard for older women to maybe go outdoors. This is something that I enjoy doing now, the tours in the mountains and in nature. Sometimes I guide really businessmen that are here for some conferences or special professional tours, and it's a very interesting encounter as well, because just socially sometimes they feel kind of free and at ease to talk, like to me as a psychologist, and to ask me about their wives and ladies. It's sometimes an extra part of the job. I mean, you always have to be a psychologist, even with family groups, and you have to make them feel, of course, I feel sometimes that I'm a mother to all of my groups in any case. But with businessmen, sometimes it's very special. Once I had a group from Taiwan, very, very nice men that came here to Tzim, to the shipping company. Very important people. They had some investments to do here, and they were interested, mainly the head of the committee, with art. So the tour was in Caesarea, not far from Haifa, in Caesarea, to see the Roman excavations, but I saw that he wanted to see art, so I took them to the Raleigh Museum, and a South American artist, and he was so knowledgeable. Coming from Taiwan, I was really shocked, and I learned from him about many of the artists that I myself didn't know. And then they had a meeting here in Haifa, and it turned out, because they were first on the tour in the archaeological site, they didn't have ties with them, so they asked me, "Can you please bring us to a shop that we can find ties?" And I called my husband, who was, "Where do you find ties in Haifa?" In 5 minutes, he said, "No, bring them home." So we brought the 4 men here, and we opened my husband's closet, and he said, "Choose from my ties." And then they came back. This was also very nice. I like to bring people home also, because sometimes for them it's a big experience to see how locals live their lives. But then they met my husband, and they saw Israeli ties, and this was like a whole extra to the tour. So again, they're businessmen, but sometimes you find the very humane character in the tour just by these tiny little additions, and that's another thing I love.
I want to dig a little deeper here, just because you were telling us earlier about how you went, you had your education, you got a master's as well, but then for many years you really didn't work because you were raising kids. You were also living abroad, so I'm sure there were complications related to that as well. Do you think that guiding as a profession is a good profession for women? Because also, as you mentioned, now you can go for a week or 12 days, but earlier you wouldn't have probably done those kind of tours. So do you think that this is a profession which takes the needs of women into consideration, or is it one which is women obviously excel at and do, but it's certain periods in their life, before they have kids and after they have kids?
I think this is a wonderful profession. I didn't know I would enjoy it so much. Unfortunately, now I have to stay home, but because of the corona. But it has so many opportunities for whatever stage in life you are, because I see the young women can choose. It's because you are quite independent in this job. You can choose to have daily trips or short trips if you work with the education system. Some guides work with children, Israeli children in the school age, or with the Society for Protection of Nature, also which have day trips. Some women that have small children can work on the weekend, where the husband can pitch in. Then again, when you become older, you can expand the days of your work week. But I think it's really a never-ending option, and you decide yourself how you want it and in which niche you want to fit in, because it's actually the luck of this independence that we have, and when you want to work and when not. If you're a mother that wants to stay home with the kids in the summer, if you still have small kids, I think you can, and then work in the high seasons, which now, when there was tourism, was in November, October, when the kids are still quite busy at school. But I think really...
so there's just so many options that you can really find your way within it in terms of the guiding.
Yes, and I see that many women that are young really, or before children or with children, can choose to have... they work maybe all week, but they have a short day tour, and sometimes only a few hours a day. Everything is possible, even with tourists, because, example... these business tourists that they only have a slot of half a day because they go back to their meetings. And
that's ideal for mothers who don't want to work full days or leave the house for a couple of days.
Right. And then again, when you become older and your physical abilities change, sometimes you can do trips that are mainly for older people. There are lots of tourists that come here after they retire, and you have to consider that. That's, again, one of the things I love about being a Eshkol driver with the minivans, because some people even need the help of a wheelchair sometime, or a little golf cart, and everything is possible now, having this car with you at all times and using the different accessories. I think everybody can be a tourist and enjoy it to different degrees, and everybody, as a tour guide, can cater to these special needs. So it's really a wonderful puzzle that you can choose according to your needs and abilities.
Okay, I'm going to start wrapping up here, but I do have a couple kind of questions that I want to ask all of my guests. One of them is, what do you think makes a good tour guide? What makes you a good tour guide in your experience?
I think the main thing is having the group or the individual at the end of the tour saying, wow, I didn't know this and this and this about Israel. I thought this thing and it changed my perception about the country, or I'll come back with my wife next year, or I have to see some more, this wasn't enough time, etc., etc. This, I think, is a big reward. It doesn't matter if you give them history and lectures of dates and chronology. That really doesn't matter. The main thing is to make them feel happy and more curious. And sometimes really it's also a lesson I learned during the years. At the beginning, I was very stressed to learn at night all the details that I forgot from the tour guide course, and the dates and so many other details. But sometimes less is more, and sometimes just letting them sit on the peak of a mountain and look around and see the wonders, the colors, and the people. Also meeting people locally. It's a wonderful advantage of the tours. And again, by guiding small groups, this is something that you can really...
Right, that's really an advantage of the smaller groups, where you can actually go into villages and meet local people.
Right.
When you come with a big group, it kind of overwhelms the place,
Yes.
Or it's just a structured kind of show of culture, whereas smaller groups, you can actually really connect them to a place.
And then, and the other, I think, kind of feedback is when they have so many questions, and when the point of bidding them off farewell in the airport many times, but I didn't get the answer of this and this, and then I tell them always, and this is another thing, that it's nice to keep on the correspondence and connections. We have emails, and they continue to ask questions, and then when they hear things about events that happen in Israel, they ask, and how is it?
Contact you, and they ask, what is your opinion on this, or what do you think?
Exactly. So it's nice to have a beginning of a nice correspondence with maybe future visitors as well.
Okay, my next question to you is, what is your favorite place to guide in Israel, if you have one?
Oh, I have too many, but it depends. I love of course, loving nature and flowers. So in some seasons, I try to force the people to come to see specific areas that have a special type of flower or scenery in this season or that, which is sometimes in the Golan Heights. I like to show them together with a background of, on the one side, the Hermon Mountain, and then the Sea of Galilee. But I also like the desert because it's so unique. And to see the green in the desert, that's again one of my passions. It always astonishes also the people, not only to see the wilderness, which is, many people coming from Europe or the States don't have that, except if they travel far away. But here, the small distances between the green areas and the desert, and to see the desert bloom, which is, that's one of my favorite. If it's possible to travel to that area on that date, it's wonderful. But I think you can bring even dull place, even like urban cities like Tel Aviv, and graffiti and history to become alive according to your excitement. And suddenly a place that you think from the beginning looks so uninteresting and boring can turn into exciting.
So many levels to places.
Yes.
All right, my last question has to do with our current state of affairs. So how have you been doing this period of COVID when there's really been no work at all? And what are you what are you doing now to prepare for the day after COVID?
Yeah, so I've been enjoying actually the nature in my close vicinity. In the times of the lockdown and the quarantines, we could walk around this area. So I actually discovered my really close wadis and nature paths around my house. The Carmel, which is the mountain that we're living on in Haifa, has so many unknown beautiful corridors and nature, and that's one of the things I discovered, just local urban routes that I think I can use it both for Israelis and for tourists, because Haifa is kind of on the side. It's not always the main center of tourism.
Yeah, unfortunately, we don't get as much tourism as I think this place merits in terms of its history and beauty. It's really a special place, the Carmel Mountain, but it's often bypassed for other places.
People usually see the Baha'i gardens, which are wonderful, and some of the downtown, which also is really interesting. But the nature here is just very vast and so close, and I think it's a good reason to stop here and not only kind of pass it on the way. I've been doing some courses, studying myself, or just deepening my knowledge and refreshing some classes, and doing many trips all over the place. I think like yourself, I walked the Golan
the
path.
Trail? You did the whole trail?
Yeah,
Wow.
which is nice. We did it with friends, not in one go, but in a few days, and it's wonderful. I mean, back and forth. And some other trails in the desert, which I didn't know. And again, the tour guide course is wonderful, but there is so much more to discover.
Sure.
And especially with the high tourism that we experienced in the last years and the crowds everywhere, I thought we really need to start taking alternative tours, because sometimes the time that you spend in the traffic jams or in the line to enter some special site, you can really avoid by just taking to some other alternative, not well-known route, and again, using our luck and fortune as a tour guide, which is a driver, and being flexible as such.
Right.
I think that's a very big advantage that we can use in the future when tourism starts again.
All right, well, I want to thank you for your time, and I would really like for people, if they want to contact you, for them to know how to contact you. Maybe an email address or Facebook. What is the best way to get in touch with you if someone wants to?
Yeah, I'm still working on my website, but one day it'll become a reality. I have an email address, and I'll give it to you.
Yeah, right? No? You can say it right now.
Okay. Okay, so it's my name, Elinoar, Alinoar.
A-L-I or E-L-I?
Yeah, E-L-I.
E, okay, sounded like A, so E-L-I.
N-O-A-R. Dot NITZANI is my last name, N-I-T-Z-A-N-I at gmail.com.
Okay, and I'll add this into the program notes as well, so people can find that information there.
Okay.
And once you have a website, I'll be happy to include that in there as well.
It's under construction, but every time I kind of change the contents, because there are things that are changing so fast. But yes,
that's great.
It'll force me to finish the project soon.
Okay, well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I really appreciate it. This was great.
It was fun for me.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. And yeah, and like I said, I'll put all this stuff in the program notes. And thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, how was that episode for you? I think that one of the things that comes out from our conversation with Elinoar is really what a caring and compassionate person that she is. It's no wonder that when I was working as a tour operator, that she was really one of our go-to guides for tours in general, especially for tours where tourists needed to be driven around. I recall, actually, I wanted to share this, that most people think that tour guides, that all we do is basically we're on vacation and we're getting paid to be on vacation. But I think that what we do really is, kind of a service for people. And I can give you one example of that, which is that one of the times Elinoar was invited to guide was for a mother and daughter. The mother was dying of cancer, and she wanted to show her daughter around our city of Haifa, where she had grown up, and she needed a tour guide to help, explain some of the things that she herself didn't know about the city. And so we took Elinoar for that job, and she did an amazing job. All right, I don't want to make this any longer than it has to be. I had a big intro, it was a long interview, but there are two things that I wanted to say and I wanted to, discuss. First of all, it is that, this episode, what you listen to right now is from 8 months ago. But in many ways, for us as guides, really nothing has changed. I mean, not one day has really passed in terms of our situation. The skies are still closed. There are still no tourists. Recently, I was reading a book. It's a book which is a recent bestseller on the New York Times list. And when I got to the epilogue of the book, it started talking about back when there was a lockdown in March, and it was, scary, and everybody was home, and they were talking about COVID as something which was, a historical event, which was finished, and that was that. Whereas for me, I'm still living that. I mean, and so are all the thousands of other tour guides here and around the world, many more than that, who are still living this nightmare of COVID. It's not over for us. I mean, for us, in many ways, it's no different now than it was during the first lockdown. In some ways, it's, a bit more depressing now, because during the first lockdown, I'd go out in the morning and all the cars would be here. Whereas now, I'm at home and everyone else is at work. And the only difference is that my unemployment is about to run out and I don't really have anything that can replace what I've been doing for years now, and also I don't have any opportunity to work. So it's really not, it's frustrating. When I listened to this and I thought that 8 months have gone by and really nothing has happened, it was very frustrating. The other thing I wanted to say was that 2 days ago I went to a protest rally. This was tour guides protesting the fact that the skies here are still closed, that we can't work, and that our government benefits are running out. And this was probably the best attended protest that we've had so far. But it left me profoundly troubled and sad. There's really no interest in our situation. I mean, a couple hundred tour guides got together and protested, and there was not even one news station that, could spare a reporter to come and talk to us. I kind of thought to myself, if a protest happens and no one's there to report it, did the protest even really happen? And while, our leaders were saying, don't worry, this is going to end up on the news, we're going to send videos, we're recording this, it's going to happen, I didn't see anything on the news. There are some Knesset members who are speaking up for tour guides, and I really, really appreciate that. But they're doing it, because it's the right thing to do, and because maybe they have some personal connection to a tour guide. But there's really no sense that anybody really cares. The Israelis can leave the country and travel, so they feel good about that. But tourists can't come in. And the government, in a very cheap way, kind of can just say, well, look, we're protecting you by keeping the skies closed. Meanwhile, all the variants are here, and the disease is spreading again because the Delta variant came in, which is inevitable. There are going to be other variants, and there's no way to stop it at this point. We're going to just have to learn how to live with the coronavirus. And so it's time to open up the skies and let us tour guides work. All right, I went over more than I wanted to. I just want to please request that you share this with your friends. If you like this episode, please like this on Facebook. You can send me an email to tourguideconfidential.com if you have anything you want to ask or say. And I appreciate you guys being here, and I hope to get another episode out to you in a couple weeks. So thank you very much. Until next time.
Is Kibbutz Virtual Travel Agency.